Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you to this edition of Through the Arsenal Gates. This is a show to educate you on people who have made history, are making history, and will make history. Our special guest today is Judy Akaka, who has a very unusual story. Welcome, Judy.
Thank you so much.
Judy, you have a very unusual family story. Tell our audience about it.
Well, my family has been in the United States for more than 100 years now. That they originally came from China, and it started with my grandfather's sister, who was trying to escape a fixed marriage in China. And she was a young woman around 1910, and she realized she just didn't want to be a second place housewife in Chinese society. She just really wanted to do things with her life. So she had been given her education by the Methodist missionaries in Shanghai. And through their help, she was able to come to the United States for an education. She started out at Mount Holyoke College and got her bachelor's degree, and then she came to Michigan to attend the University of Michigan Medical School in Ann Arbor, and she graduated in 1920 when there were not a lot of women physicians, especially Chinese physicians. So she was quite a determined woman to do this, and because her family completely cut her off after she disgraced them all so publicly. She had only one brother that supported her and kept in communication, and she was so grateful that she always promised, if your children ever want to come to the United States, I will help them, I will sponsor them. And so that's how my family came. And so as it turned out, that my father's older sister then came to the United States. She went to Mount Holyoke College, and then she also got a University of Michigan medical degree in 1939. My father came, got his degree at Earlham College in Indiana, then went on to the University of Michigan Medical School, graduating in 1943. I have another cousin who came and graduated in 1948. I have pictures of all of them. And a lot of this was possible by the work of Mr. Levi Lewis Barber, who was a regent at the University of Michigan, who really strongly supported the education of women and made special programs. He started up a scholarship for Asian women who wanted to study. And then later on, he started up a Barber Fellowship for postgraduate students who wanted to further their education. So my grandaunt, who came at the University of Michigan for her medical school, actually returned 8 years later as a Barber Fellow to continue her studies. So she studied twice at the University of Michigan. Well, that's how my family was established here. My parents had such a great experience at the University of Michigan. They never left. You know, like his older sister went back to China, but then of course the timing with the war in Europe, my father as a doctor was immediately drafted when he graduated from medical school because the US Army needed doctors. And so then when he came back...
Where did he serve, Judy?
He served in Italy, France, and Germany. He was part of the hospital mission that went to the Dachau concentration camp after liberation, after the Nazi guards had abandoned the camp, and people were starting to realize what was still remaining were hundreds and hundreds of prisoners who needed food, they needed medical care, they needed everything. They had just been abandoned there. So it was the U.S. Army that set up a field hospital like MASH and started treating the patients there. And my father told me it was such a difficult situation because there were so many hundreds of prisoners, but they could only start out very slowly, you know, selecting like the top 50 people who were sick enough to really need their care, but not so far gone that they wouldn't survive. So he said it was very tricky, you know, to find the people who could have the greatest benefit from their services. And after he was discharged from that, he was very fortunate because at the time there was an anti-Chinese law in effect. It was called the Oriental Exclusion Law that prevented Chinese people from becoming U.S. citizens. And this was implemented in the 1800s because of the proliferation of Chinese immigrants that came to work on the railroad. And everybody was terrified that all these Chinese people were going to disrupt the country if they were allowed to become citizens. So they made a law saying you could not be a citizen if you were Chinese. But after serving in the U.S. military, the government changed the law and said if you had served in the military, then you were entitled to become a U.S. citizen if you chose to. And so that's what my father did, and so we were very fortunate.
That's a tough way to become an American citizen.
Yes, so he was actually sworn in as a citizen in Marseille, France, while he was still overseas.
No, I love it. Out of curiosity, did he ever reflect on his time in the military? Was it a good experience? Was it a bad experience?
It was a good experience because he had seen a lot of war casualties when he was in China. When he left China in 1938, China had been fighting against the Japanese for many years, and that was one of his motivations when he saw how many people were being killed and hurt, and they had no resources to help them. He was determined to come to the United States, get his medical training, and then return to China to help the Chinese people. But by the time that he had graduated and finished serving in the military, he had completed his residencies that he required, you know, for further training in surgery and anesthesia. It was 1948, and my mother was pregnant at the time. She said she did not want to go on a slow boat back to China. And by the time my brother was born, they realized that the communist revolution was really insurmountable, that the communists were going to take over China. And they felt that they had no option to return to China.
Did they, or did you ever go to China?
Yes,
okay.
Yes, but only in more recent years. My parents were never able to go back until the 1980s after Nixon had opened up China to the West. And they went back and they saw many of the changes because they had belonged to a wealthy class, and their family had a huge compound. It was like 42 rooms, and it was, you know, with a courtyard. And it was a multi-family home for my father's family and also for uncles and cousins and servants. There was a very large home. But my father said when he went back to see it in the 80s, he said that there were 42 separate families living in the 42 rooms. And, you know, and he recognized, you know, that this was what China needed. There was such a tremendous disparity between the rich and poor that he said this was really necessary for China and for the Chinese people. So he was happy to see that, but his family had really suffered. They had lost all of their property, and they had been punished for being part of the upper class and the educated class that had connections to the Western world, and they really suffered for that. Some of his family members were imprisoned, some died of starvation, some were sent out to the countryside to work as menial laborers, and so many of his family had already been killed one of his sisters, who was a U of M graduate, she was killed by the Red Guard.
Wow.
And her husband had died in prison of starvation. So some of his family members said, "Oh, Uncle, you were so smart. You stayed in the United States." And he said it was just luck, that the timing was that he could not come back to China. Yeah. And it turned out to be a very fortuitous situation for him to stay in the United States.
Yeah. For a lot of people that have served in the military, especially those who were immigrants, they found the U.S. Army to be a great experience because it was a great leveling device. Everybody, in effect, had the same rank when they came in. So, where were you born, Judy?
I was actually born in Minneapolis, Minnesota.
What hospital?
St. Mary's. Do you know the hospital?
I went to the University of Minnesota, did my graduate work there, and my wife was born in Ramsey County Hospital, which is in St. Paul. So anyhow, that's all I know about the hospital system in the Twin Cities. Yeah. Now, how did you end up in Dearborn?
Well, my parents loved the Michigan area because of all of their close associations with Ann Arbor, and my father got a job offer at the VA hospital that was in Allen Park at the time. Cool. So that's how, we came to this area, and we were looking for a nice home. And my parents did their homework, and they realized Dearborn was a great community. It had wonderful city services. It had, the Ford Motor Company contributing to the tax base, and had exemplary schools. They just loved everything about Dearborn. But unfortunately, this was in the 1950s, and Orville Hubbard was mayor. And Orville Hubbard had a policy of not allowing non-whites to live in Dearborn. His motto was, "Keep Dearborn clean." And so my parents had great difficulty. Even though my father was professionally employed with a secure income, they could not purchase a house. Every time they approached a realtor, the realtors would tell them there are no homes available. So they ended up buying a house in Dearborn Heights, which was not quite what they had hoped for in terms of, the beautiful neighborhoods and exemplary schools. But they figured it was close enough. It was a nice, safe neighborhood, and it was close proximity to the hospital. And so I was actually raised in Dearborn Heights until I got to the high school age. After the 1966 Civil Rights Act, then, all these barriers, for racial integration were torn down, and my parents were finally able to buy a property in Dearborn, which they'd always wanted because of, the library system, Camp Dearborn. There were so many amenities Absolutely. That they wanted.
Yeah. And it's not that far removed time-wise from where we are today. Now, what street did you grow up on?
Right here on Garrison.
Oh, you're kidding.
No, well, actually, because I was in high school and my brother had already gone to college, and my parents had gone through the whole suburban house with the lawn and the snow shoveling and all that stuff. They said, forget that. And they bought a condo at Dearborn Towers.
Ah, okay.
And so when I was in high school, that's where I lived, in Dearborn Towers, and went to Dearborn High School.
Now, Judy, tell our audience how many other minorities were at Dearborn High with you.
Well, at that time, I would say 0 that were apparent to me. I saw no black people, I saw no Asian people. And now that I have a better understanding, there were a few Arabic students then, but I didn't know that they were Arabic. I remember one girl, and her last name was Berry, and I didn't know that that was also an Arabic name, because she just seemed like all American to me. There were other kids, with the name Mansour, which I naively thought was French. I didn't know that that was also an Arabic name.
Now, how was it at Dearborn High?
Well, it was difficult because people didn't know how to react to me as a Chinese person. They thought that it was so soon after World War II that there was still a lot of underlying hostilities towards Japanese.
So they figured, you're Asian.
Chinese, Japanese,
yeah,
what's the
they're all
difference?
the same. Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
So I did meet a little bit of hostility, and which I felt was so ironic because my father had, served in the U.S. Army.
Absolutely.
And, but, I did my best to educate people that I am fully American. I don't speak Chinese.
Do you eat Chinese food?
I love Chinese food. I do love Chinese food. My mother was a fabulous cook, and so that was a problem too. In fact, she only cooked Chinese food, so it was hard for me to invite friends to come over for dinner or things like that, because she always served things that people were frightened of. They didn't know what it was, and being young kids, a lot of them would just refuse to try it. They had that fear, so it was awkward a little bit, to be Chinese and living in a white society that had very little understanding of the culture.
Now, did you have a favorite teacher at Dearborn High?
I did have a favorite teacher. I remember his name was Don, was it Hagen or O'Hagan? I can't remember. He was an English professor or English teacher, and he was just so animated, I guess is the best word. He was English teacher, and he taught Shakespeare, and I wanted to learn about Shakespeare, and he just brought it out to life. He just really fleshed it out and made it a real positive learning experience.
Oh, very good. And what other qualities did he have that you think are important?
Well, his overall enthusiasm for the material, and also his sincere interest in making sure that his students could appreciate, the beauty of the literature that he was trying to teach us about.
Okay, cool. Very good. You might want to make a trip over to the museum on Brady to take a look at old yearbooks and see if you can find his picture in there. So what are your values?
Oh, that's hard. What's so general? What are my values? I think I believe in kindness and fairness. I think as being a victim of some racism, during my early years, it was more blatant than it is now. Where I remember going to summer camp at Greenfield Village, and some people telling me that I shouldn't be allowed to drink from the drinking fountain, that, they shouldn't have to share with me, that I should have a separate place. And that was shocking to me. I'd never heard anybody express something like that. And I was only about 10 years old. I didn't understand it. So that was a hard lesson.
Yeah. Where did you go to college?
Well, I started out at Michigan State University for the first 2 years, and
did your parents forgive you for that?
They were disappointed, and I think that was part of my rebellion, because they were so U of M, rah, rah, rah. Everything in our house, we had pennants, we had glasses, we had playing cards, everything. And I think I rebelled and said, well, I want to go to Michigan State. And in fact, I did not love Michigan State. It was just too big, and the party atmosphere was inescapable. And I realized that I am not going to flourish in this environment. And so I left after 2 years, and I had been talking to my older brother. He'd gone to school at Oberlin, and he said, well, you don't have to go to school in Michigan. He said, you can go anywhere. He said, you can go to the University of Fiji. And I just thought, well, that's too extreme. I don't even know where Fiji is, but I started thinking about tropical environments, and I thought, oh, Hawaii has a university. I could go to Hawaii. So that's how I ended up actually transferring to the University of Hawaii, and it was beautiful.
Families, think about this. Child wants to go to college, cold weather or Hawaii? Think about it.
Tough decision.
Yeah. So now you led an unconventional life in Hawaii. Tell our audience about it.
Well, I met my future husband in class. He was also a science major like me, and he was a native Hawaiian born person, but his family had moved to California, and he actually grew up in California. But when he got older, he wanted to return to his Hawaiian roots. So he came back to Hawaii, and he bought a piece of property out in the jungle. A lot of the Big Island Hawaii is underdeveloped, and still is to this day. And so he convinced me that it would be great to homestead this property and build a little house on it, and we would live off-grid, and it would be all ours, and we would be free spirits. And I really bought into it, but I was 22 years old. And so it was a lot of work to live off-grid and build a house. It was very simple, 16 by 24, and we had nothing. We just collected rainwater off the roof. We had a generator if he needed to use a power tool, and we had kerosene lamps for the evening and a lot of mosquito nets. And so we lived out there for almost 7 years. Unfortunately, I got tired of it. It wasn't really me, and I realized I wasn't being true to myself, and I wasn't being true to him either, because he wanted a spouse that would really share that dream with him. And in the meantime, we had a child, and I just found the burden of, raising food and chickens and raising a child and having all this laundry with no running water and all these things, just too stressful. And we split up shortly after our son was, a toddler. But I just remember, we had chickens, and I would be plucking a chicken, and I thought, I'm a college graduate. Do I need to spend half a day plucking a chicken?
So didn't you raise an unconventional crop as well?
Oh, absolutely. Well, this is the early 1970s, and marijuana was a very, very popular item for people to grow out in the jungle because it was so dense that people would not be able to find your patches. But we did live in fear of the helicopters that would patrol because they could see the paths that we would take to grow our marijuana. But we were fortunate, we never got caught.
Did you become quasi-wealthy as a result of that?
Well, it was a major source of income for us. We really, we tried growing guavas as a cash crop, and we tried having beehives for the honey, but unfortunately, it just didn't pay the bills. We couldn't get enough money from those products, and that was part of the stress also.
Sure. So you have one child?
Well, now I have 3 children. I showed you a picture of my 3 kids. That the oldest was my son, who was, here he is. He was born in Hawaii. Uh-huh. And then after we divorced, I came back to Michigan because my parents were here. And I figured they could help me with the child care. And I was very fortunate. I got a fellowship at Wayne State University in physiology. So I entered the PhD program with the fellowship. And after that, I met my current husband, Tom, and we married a couple years later in the 80s, and we had 2 daughters.
Very good. What do your children do today?
Well, my husband was a graphic arts designer. He was a creative director at an advertising agency. And so my son was a mathematics major at Pomona College. My daughter, the eldest that went to U of M, is now a physical therapist at Corewell Health because she has the science gene. And my younger daughter has the art gene. Okay. So she is a freelance graphic designer and painter, and she lives out in Oakland, California.
Okay. Now, you were trained as a pharmacist. Is that an occupation that you enjoyed?
I loved it. It was the best decision I made in my life because I had originally gone to Wayne State to get my PhD in physiology. So at the time I thought, well, I'm going to be a laboratory researcher and I'm going to make some wonderful discoveries and save humanity. And it turned out that it was not as enjoyable as I thought it would be. The laboratory work was just not exciting. I felt kind of lonely being in the lab, spending so much time in the laboratory. And also I realized that that was part of the work, that I wouldn't have as much time for my family if I continued to work in research. So I stopped so I could stay home and take care of my young kids. And it wasn't until, I started buying this real estate, because I was at home with my kids and I thought, what can I do to earn some money? And I decided I could invest in real estate. And so one of the houses that I bought, I rented out to a young man who was a pharmacist. And he was a pharmacist at Henry Ford Hospital. And he told me about his work of taking care of patients on the floors, not being in a drugstore, counting out pills, but actually having direct patient care and collaborating with doctors and nurses and reviewing the patient's history and situation and planning their protocol, for treatment. And I just thought, well, that is the most fascinating thing. That's what I'm interested in. I love the science and I love the hands-on direct contact with patients. And so I decided at the age of 44, my kids were getting older now, I figured I could go back to school full-time and become a pharmacist. And so that's what I did. My friends all said, oh, you're crazy. By the time you finish, you're going to be 47. And I said, well, I'm going to be 47 anyway, so I might as well just get the degree.
That's remarkable to go back at that age. I suspect you could be the mother to all of your students.
Absolutely. I had all these young kids, 22, 23 years old, in class with me, and they were so young and so naive, and many of them were living at home with their parents, and like they had their laundry taken care of, they had their meals prepared, and I just thought, well, I can do this, I'm as smart as anybody, and I can just, if they can do it, I can do it, even though I've got to run my household and take care of kids. Yeah. But I just powered through and just finished.
Yeah, very good, very good. Now, in society today, who would you consider to be good role models for young people?
Well, especially for women, I mean, I really love political figures like Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris, because they, I think, really saw the barriers that were facing them as they prepared for their futures, and they weren't going to be deterred. And I know that many women have successful parents to guide them, and I think that's so important, that that my mother, actually being a U of M graduate and having a master's degree in public health, I think she was a role model for me because I could see what she had gone through. She would tell me, as a public health student, she had to go and knock on people's doors and meet up with patients, and she faced a lot of discrimination, that people would not even let her in the house because she was Chinese. And I think that for a lot of women, they have to fight harder, they have to push harder, and I think that's so important because a lot of people are easily discouraged. They think that if somebody says no, then that means it's not possible. And I believe it so strongly that anything is possible. If you push and push and go about it the right way, the nice way, you can achieve what you really need.
Very good. Give us the worst thing that ever happened to you and how you dealt with it.
Oh, the worst thing. Well, I have to say I've been very fortunate. My brother and I talk about this all the time, that we were the lucky ones. We were born in this country, that our parents became US citizens. We were fortunate that we were raised in a very supportive family and a well-educated family that had more worldliness than the people around us. Basically, living in Dearborn Heights, most people were not college educated. Many people had never left the state of Michigan. And so I think the worst of it, was when I was at that camp and I heard people saying, I shouldn't drink from the drinking fountain. And I remember in the back of my mind seeing pictures of, down south when they had like diners and gas stations and would discriminate against people. And I just remember I was getting a drink of water, and when this girl said it, I just turned around and I spat the water out right at her. And of course everybody was screaming, and I got pulled into the director's office, and my parents were called because they were just going to kick me out of camp for such bad behavior. And I told them what had transpired, and they were just kind of shocked. I don't remember them saying anything to the girl who had initiated this fallout, but I remember that they did not punish me in any way.
Do you think you are still on occasion discriminated against because you are Chinese?
I think yes. I think much of it is benign. I think people have no awareness of their own prejudices, and it's not malicious, but sometimes it's just very thoughtless. I think I've gone into stores where someone will think that they're being very friendly and complimentary and telling me that my English is very good. And so, well, thank you. It's the only language I speak. Other times people will ask me, how long have I been in this country? And I don't know what would give them the impression that I came from another country, but I remember one time I was on a bus, and an Asian woman was trying to get on the bus, but she wasn't sure what it was, which bus, and she was talking to the driver, and the driver couldn't communicate with her. And I mean, I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could see she was Asian. And the man next to me elbowed me and said, "Why don't you go up and help her?" I was like, okay, well, no. I don't speak any language but English.
One last question. Life is short. What do you want people to say about you after you go to the next life?
That I tried to help people. I tried to help people in their daily living, through my friendships, through my community, through my employment. I always had the intention to do good by people and to raise my children to be productive and beneficial members of society. And I think if we all did that, the world would be so much better.
Very good. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed this session of Through the Arsenal Gates with Judy Akaka. If you enjoyed it, tell all of your friends and relatives. If you didn't enjoy it, just keep it to yourself. Thanks for joining us.